Hi, and welcome to Post-Burnout.com interviews. Post-Burnout.com is a culture website dedicated to venerating burnt-out artists the world over. My name is Aaron Kavanagh, and I'm the website's founder and editor-in-chief. This is our website's podcast where we interview people from various artistic disciplines. These episodes are sometimes full-length interviews from our site's articles and other times exclusives. If you're a returning listener, thanks for coming back. And if you're new here, thanks for checking us out. We hope you'll like it and stick around with us. In this edition of Post-Burnout.com interviews, we talk with Julie Hawke and Matt Harris of the Dublin-based alternative band Hawk. They talk about their new insomnia-shaping album To Fall Asleep, which is released today, the project's 10th anniversary, how they met doing open mic nights in London, starting the artist-driven platform and distribution model VETA Music, the new edition of Bitch Falcon's Nigel Kenny on drums, procrastination, their launch gig at Workman Cellar next week, their new projects, their plans for the rest of the year, and more. One thing I want to note is about halfway through, someone called Pete comes in. Pete's a cat, by the way. I thought I need to explain that. So I actually have a note written here in my notes that just says, explain that Pete is a cat. So now you know. Anyway, enjoy. Hi, Julie. How are you?
Hey, good,
It's really
thanks.
nice to meet you.
Also have Matt, but he'll be here in a sec. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, it's
Great.
nice to meet you.
You too, you too. This is Matt.
Hi, Matt.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. Yeah. So the
Thanks
first
for
thing I
having
was,
us on.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks very much for doing it. Yeah, the first thing I was going to ask, quite simply, I mean, like Hawk has been around for, I guess, about a decade now, right? And I mean, you guys met from doing open mics in London, as far as I'm aware. So I was just wondering, like, you know, in that amount of time, I mean, I think your music has kind of like fluctuated a lot. I mean, obviously, you guys have kind of like moved from like London to Berlin to Dublin, kind of like all around the place. I was wondering, you know, how much do you think time and location has kind of affected the sound of your music?
A very good question.
Sorry if it's a little heavy to start with.
No, not at all. Like, if I can pick up from the very beginning, the time and sound in terms of when we met and it being open mic nights, I mean, that was very, for me, very relevant to just the beginnings of a songwriting, a full stop. I'd never written songs before, so that is what brought me to the open mic where I literally met Matt for the first time. You were kind of a seasoned open micer at that point. And you were working on the sound desk that night.
I wouldn't say I was a seasoned open micer, but I've been playing gigs and shows and stuff, and I was co-writing with the person that ran them. So we'd spend a day co-writing, and then she'd be like, do you want to come to the open mic? And I'd be like, yeah, sure, why not? And mostly it was just a vehicle to go to a pub and have a drink.
Yeah.
But obviously it was a point in my life where I wanted to meet more musicians, because like I was digging through your site, and I think it's really interesting angle to look at that kind of, you know, having a revenue generating day job versus music in the background. And when we met, I had been, you know, what would I have been, 27, 28 at the time. And I had been working full time in a corporate landscape. And we met in the first of 3 years that I took off to try and find my musical self. So I'd say, yeah, you're sort of talking about when we met in the open mic night landscape, and that for me was probably newish to
it was brand new to me, but like,
I mean, I'd only been around that scene for about 6 months or so, maybe a bit longer at that point, but yeah, I think it was new to both of us in terms of creating music for that environment where there's a jack lead and a mic, and that's it, you know?
But not just that environment in terms of sound, but that environment in terms of you're in a room. Well, we were especially in a room full of really like forgiving and enthusiastic and supportive fellow songwriters. So it was also a space where you might come once, have a new song every week. Some people certainly did that came, and we were going to like 3 to 4 open mics a week with the same core group of people turning up to each one, and we're like collaborating on each other's songs and really seeing the evolution, and also just seeing people's stage presence really evolve through, you know, whatever their technique of even just speaking to a crowd. So that was how that's why the beginnings of our music was way more in the folk space, because it was more a project that, well, you were originally my producer working on my folk stuff, and we did that for a while until we realized how much we like to make lots and lots of noise, which definitely became more solidified being in London. Being in, I think, the move to Berlin, and more of the DIY scene over there kind of solidified that a bit more.
I think location definitely had an impact, but I think the people around the project is the thing that I always look at, thinking that had a big sort of shaping impact on what we did. And this is probably awkward for print because it's kind of vague and whatever, or I don't know, but I think we've never really kind of told this story to anybody outside of people in the project. But obviously when we started, it was Julie's songs that I was trying to make sound better, and we were sort of playing as a duo. I was playing the bass at the time, and it was very acoustic. We did an EP, and the strategy around it was sandwiching what I'd learned in 5 odd years of being in this other band. It was doing all the good things that we'd done over 5 years and just sandwiching that into 6 months. And because in the band, we did something good, and then we were like, now what do we do? And the momentum dipped. And so I call it like the caterpillar of disappointment, when you're just up and down, and it kind of, it's something that a lot of bands experience. And so we kind of were trying to just make that zoom off into the distance, and it worked. You know, we released the EP, and before you knew it, there was management, a lawyer, 6 music plays from the Mac, and it was like, holy shit, okay, so this is happening then. And we just hadn't thought about it at all. I hadn't. I don't know about you. Like, I'd obviously dreamed about being in a successful project.
Just thought this is what happens.
But we had no finished songs to follow up with. We had nothing really to show anyone. And that was when we met our first manager, Paul, and he was a big influence on getting ready to go for the next release. And we realized that we maybe needed to muck in together on some of the writing elements of tracks, because I think whilst your ideas were great, they maybe weren't as frequent as as they needed to be.
Idealistic.
I
spent 6 months writing a 6-minute song.
And it was kind of like, you need that next thing to show people now. So we kind of changed the way we were writing then. I think Paul was good at kind of getting us talking, but certainly getting you talking about what influenced you. And like, I didn't even know Sleater Kinney really, and the punkier influences on your music at that point. And you shared, like, Paul was a big punk kid essentially from the 70s and 80s, and so any chance to talk about that sort of stuff he kind of grabbed, and that, I think, opened that door. And then we had like a really horrible limbo period where we were still that folk thing, but there were tracks coming through like Hush that
were heavier,
we knew were good, and were getting responses from, you know, people that we wanted responses from. And I think we did Ireland Music Week, which at the time was Hard Working Class Heroes, and we had a fucking horrible time.
It was the worst.
Just absolutely miserable. And Paul introduced us to some music manager friends that he knows that will remain nameless.
I was going to say, please don't name me.
And I just remember them kind of talking to Julie, because at the time it was Julie Hawke. So there was no semblance of a band. It was just us kind of trying to figure it out. And they just were kind of cutting through some of the invasive, maybe sexist and terrible things that they were saying. They were saying the project is confusing. And so I think one of our great strengths in life is when we have a bad moment, being like, okay, what do we do about this?
What do we do to make sure we never feel like this again?
Exactly.
No one should be allowed to make us feel like this again. But also,
And
Did he have a point?
Yeah.
Really?
Exactly that. Like the conversation was awful. I think we were stood back to back.
Oh, it's horrible.
While I was talking to someone telling me why we were shit, and Julie was talking to someone else telling her why we were shit. And we were both trying to hear the other people's thing. It was just
and also I really wanted you over in
Yeah.
the conversation. I was like, man, I don't know what to say to this man.
There was one guy that said to you, which one of them is your boyfriend? And I was like, fuck, I am going to punch that guy so hard any second now. And I just lost all the will to kind of contribute effectively to a nice evening. But we had a massive long train journey the next day because we were going back to London via the ferry, but on the train. And we just kind of talked, do we want to do the folk thing and kind of go in hard on that? And I think I was okay with that idea. I thought we'd made progress. And because it was the second or third music project I contributed to, I wasn't as determined for it to be like a really personal representation of my musical self. I didn't mind if it was something that we could do well rather than something that we desperately wanted to do. But you, I think, really wanted to try the band thing and lean more into that. And our manager definitely thought that was the way to go. So
I think I'd gotten writing the songs out of my system and seen that was a thing. But I think what I remembered then in the meantime was, oh yes, I've always seen myself as part of the alternative scene. But the difference is now I'm not just a fan or feeling like an outsider because, loads of the lads I hung out with in Galway would have been in bands, but I would have been like their friend who kind of sometimes plays the keyboard. And I really...
With two fingers.
Yeah, with only two fingers. And I think I just was enjoying the singer-songwriter so much, but when actually presented with a choice of like, actually, do we want to scrap this and try something else? I realized how important that was to me and how I'd kind of not been listening to that part of myself.
Yeah, I really remember being in the process of creating ideas and having Pro Tools open, and we were looking at new songs, and I remember just getting like a plug-in drum kit up and playing some drums on the keyboard, and the louder it got, the more you were like, yes and that just kind of, I think that really sort of, we then got a rehearsal space, didn't we, with Chris and Sam, and then when you get in the room and you can just make as much noise as you want, I think that had a big influence. And in Berlin, as much as there were ups and downs on that, we did spend a lot of time in the room just kind of playing and seeing what happened. And
our rehearsal space cost us like €50
a week.
Week?
Maybe not even a week. Maybe it was a month.
It would have been a month.
I think it was €100 a month.
Yeah. And we could keep our stuff in there. So we had like much more flexibility in terms of getting in just to experiment.
Yeah.
Make mistakes. And
I think that's kind of when I'd say we found a sound, and that was midway between our last EP and our first album, was when I think it felt like we were sort of landing in a shoegaze zone with what we were doing, and the reviews were all starting to say the same thing rather than comparing us to completely different things every time we did something.
It wasn't.
Yep.
But yeah, I'd say that was when there were a lot of people around the project kind of trying to influence what we sounded like. And then the more time we spent with each other without those voices, the more we just kind of found the thing that we wanted to make. And that's not to say those voices were bad. It's just, I think maybe I listened to them a bit too much, and, maybe I put a bit too much of an emphasis in terms of production and mixing and directing, like the noise we were making, to try and, I've always believed that if you can motivate someone, they'll do a better job of what they're meant to do, whether that's your manager, a PR person, people in the band. Like, there were, at the time, Chris would have been very similar to me in taste, but Sam would have had very kind of complicated jazz math things going on in his head, and Julie would have had just a bit more fun. So it was trying to kind of crush those worlds together.
Trying to crush our spirits
in the end,
into the same spirit.
Complicated, sad stuff. And, it was difficult. And then obviously, as the project became more just Julie and I really directing the creative side of it, I think we just now do what the two of us like.
Yeah.
And Rocky obviously producing us has made a massive difference because he is, like, I think his all-time favorite track is Burn Baby Burn by Ash, which that's completely different to where we would be going. I mean, maybe not as much different to you. I think you share a lot of the same tastes, but my least favorite track on that album is Burn Baby Burn. So it's like but at the same time I want Rocky to like what we're doing, so finding that kind of point where, you know, we're kind of, he's excited about the music and we're still ticking boxes for us. I think that's always been my biggest influence, is who are the voices in that room that are kind of deciding what we do, you know?
There's a number of different avenues we go for there. First of all, just before we move on, I do want to say on the record that Burn Baby Burn is a tune. But my
it's a good song, I'll give you that. Yeah.
In a weird way, and I'm probably just reaching here, but do you think like the kind of like maybe negative impact you had kind of like talking with some of the people that were in like the kind of industry side, do you think that kind of like in any way was a catalyst for setting up the VETA Collective, or do you think the two were just like completely detached?
Oof. I don't think it's a negative reaction to the industry setting up the VETA thing. I think like there are some people in that world like that are experiencing all the same challenges that artists are experiencing. And I think, you know, without wanting to oversimplify it, there's obviously some evil, you know, forces at work in terms of big corporations that run the show on the live side. You know, that is becoming a more and more monopolized world and more kind of difficult to break into. But it's not always been that way, and certainly when we started it wasn't as much that way. If anything, we might have been trying to build our reputation to the point where we could get attention from people bigger in the industry and build that team. It was probably started up as more of a let's put something that seems professional around what we do, but actually as the years have gone by, we've got a real DIY ethos in terms of we want this to empower the artists, whereas at the very beginning it was probably more of a actually we want to make this more of a shiny product that around our own band. Do you know, like the major motivation to just start VETA Records, which is where it all kicked off from, was I was working with Julie and Diver as a producer at the time. They were doing interviews every 5 minutes about how great they were, and no one knew I was even involved. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to start something and see if there's like a brand I can wrap around what I'm doing. And so it was probably vanity was the big sort of thing that kind of kicked it off. But I think, again, to your sort of theme of post-burnout, I think you need teams, you need people to support what you're doing. And what we've ended up with and pivoted towards quite quickly when we realized that we were quite good at some of the stuff that we were doing through VETA is we've now got artists and people affiliated with VETA that manage lots of different parts of the process, you know, whether that is soft touch PR stuff, whether that is actually managing uploading things to distributors or PRS, IMRO, PPL or whatever. It's taking some of that stuff away from an artist so that they can think about kind of making their own, just making music and as little else as possible. And equally, you know, when they've made it, how can they maximize the potential of it based on experience? Because again, what like we said with Hawk, it was sandwich what I'd learned in 5 years of being in a band into 6 months. And now, you know, we're 20 years down the line of my music career anyway. And it's like, if I worked on a new project right at the start, how can you sandwich all of those relevant, successful things into a timeline for that artist to give them the best chance that they possibly can? So I don't know if it was necessarily like a reaction to some of those bad conversations. I think we did spend a lot of time waiting for the industry to figure out that we were good. And that was often would lead to delays, often lead to a loss of momentum. And so that was kind of why we got better at doing things ourselves, because we were like, right, plan A is we put this out ourselves. Plan B is if this publisher wakes up or this label decides we're great or this booker thinks we're great, then we'll do stuff with them. And some of that stuff came to fruition and some of it didn't. So it was always just, let's just make sure that at the very least we do the best job that we possibly can there. And having taken responsibility for different parts of that process over the last 8 or 9 years, however long it's been since VETA's been doing what it's been doing, I think we've kind of got good at a lot of different parts of that mix. And and hopefully it's helping everybody that we talk to and work with as well.
The other thing I'd say, just not so much about VETA, but in terms of how we both lent into developing different parts of VETA and realizing that our experiences could help other people. Like for me, I think early on in music, I'm not sure if you ever struggled with this, but I definitely had this, and I hear other artists talk about this when they're, because you have a story behind the music you make and that person you are within music, there's very little space to kind of celebrate maybe the work you do outside of music, or to maybe lean into like, what am I good at in my day job that I'm actually not bringing to the table or not celebrating here? And I think it can be really hard on your sense of self to have to really separate those parts of yourself, because the bit that you're putting out there is the cool music front person who like doesn't overthink anything. And like, I would never make admin part of my personal brand in terms of brand, but actually it's something that through because I'm a copywriter during the day, and this I think alongside the band I've been having like equal momentum in terms of becoming a copywriter, and that being like my other secret career. But at some point I made this radical decision, or I had this radical thought that I didn't need to be ashamed of the person I was outside of the band. And once I started changing my mindset about that, that was where I started seeing that I could bring a lot of things to the table in the label as well, in terms of supporting the artists, mostly more on a marketing front, because I was doing all this social media design, copywriting stuff as part of my day job. And it really kind of helped my brain to be able to say, like, actually, these skills are really valid in a creative environment. And a lot of us pretend that some of that work isn't happening because you only see the tip of the iceberg on your Instagram feed. But, that work is happening, and it's kind of boring to talk about, but it's also good to feel good about.
Yeah. No, I think it's really cool. It kind of reminds me of like I think like the power of collectives is kind of cool. Like I'm noticing a lot actually here with like the kind of hip hop scene. There's like a number of like different collectives. It reminds me of like I don't know, like Discord or something like that, the record label or something like that. I don't know. The other thing I wanted to talk about, you mentioned Rocky O'Reilly. I mean, like Matt, for you, when it kind of came to like doing the kind of handing over the music to like an external producer, was that something you were kind of like precious about? Were you like, no, this is, or were you happy to do it?
I mean, I wish I was good enough to, at the time, I wish I knew enough, but I genuinely think that I wasn't precious about working with Rocky because I knew I didn't know. I'm not a very techie kind of gear orientated person, and I never really have been. I've always, even when I was producing Julie, it was always about layers of melody, and it wasn't, if I stumbled across sound, it was more of an accident and an experience based, really, because I guess my story with a lot of that is I went to a school that the year before I joined, the science block was burnt down and they got a massive insurance payout. So they built an all-weather football pitch, which was great. And they built a 24-track tape studio and no one gave a shit apart from me. So I kind of had it to myself for like 7 years of my education, and definitely took it for granted. Like I went to university and they didn't have one. And I was like, wait, so where's the studio? And they showed me like a PC with Pro Tools on it. And I was like, what? So it kind of, influenced a lot of, I'd say my great skill is layering, is just picking what instrument plays what and does what, because I just had 24 channels to mess with the whole time. And
I was going to say that you practice on a 24 track. That's insane.
Exactly that. So, and I still have the old reels
at such a young age. That's when you absorb stuff.
So that's something that definitely I took for granted. But in terms of the mics that you'd use, in terms of the preamps and all the gear, I've never been good at that. I've never found it interesting, if I'm honest. So like I just had that one thing that I plugged into and that was it. And again, the person that installed that was a big influence on me for a couple of years, and then he left the school. So really, when I was getting that formative education in it, nobody was there to show me how it worked and kind of give me that extra dimension. So Rocky actually messaged us like when we were over for Hard Working Class Heroes, maybe the next year or a couple of years afterwards. And he was like, do you have a spare day? Do you want to come in? And we'd actually just finished an EP with Dimitri Tikovoy, who was the first Not Me producer that we worked with. And that was good, but I felt like we lost a bit of control. And that's tracks like Once Told, Ghosts, songs I absolutely love, but I listen to how they sound and I can tell that we compromised. We were like, yeah, okay, fine, sort of through gritted teeth, and we kind of did things differently. Like I know on one of those albums, Sam was playing the kick and the snare separate to the cymbals, and I can just hear that in everything. I can hear him just being like gently tapping the cymbals instead of like what he'd be doing if he was hitting everything. And there's really good things about all of that, and I learned so much kind of looking over his shoulder. But actually, the person that mixed that was Catherine Marks, who's just won 1 billion Grammys for Boy Genius. And so she's like working, like looking over her shoulder, watching her mix and seeing how she did things was a really valuable experience to help me understand it more. But I still didn't feel like it was going to be a 360-degree thing where I'd want to sort of see it from inception through to the finish. And we spent one day in with Rocky, and all of the things that I found difficult about being in the room with other producers just went away. When we turned up, he had everything set up. We didn't have to wait for anything to be ready. And immediate, like, he supports a shit football team. At the time, I supported a shit football team. It felt like...
I can't say that anymore.
No, I'm a Brighton fan. We're now like in the top 10. So it's kind of... it's got weird. But yeah, I definitely... I would say I was precious about what it ended up feeling like and sounding like. I'd say we all were. We were all having much more of an opinion on that. But I definitely trusted that Rocky got that and that he would take it from maybe the 70 or 7 out of 10 I could get it to and eke it up to 9. And I think we all saw massive value in that. And so, yeah, I would say that whilst we've only maybe had one argument with Rocky in the studio about synths, and that's it, most of the time he's just kind of finding ways to make what we do just that extra 20 to 30% better than it would be if he wasn't involved. And I think that's not what everybody needs from a producer, but it's definitely what we needed, and I think continue to need from the tracks. So never really had any issues with that.
Yeah, one thing actually I noticed, because like throughout your discography, as you've kind of as members kind of come and go, and as your situation changes, I noticed that there is like a huge kind of like change from project to project. And one thing I noticed, like one consistent through line, I think that's very kind of important, is the kind of spaciousness of the music. I mean, I find that like from the lows to highs and the mid range, I mean, I think everything is like is covered, but I feel like everyone kind of has, I don't know, their own space. I don't know if you guys feel that from like Rocky's production too, because I mean, again, from the actual tracks you bring them, they're very different from each time, but I think that's one thing that kind of connects them.
Yeah, I think I don't remember when it was that someone asked us to come up with 3 words to describe ourselves, but one of the words that was in the mix was definitely layers or layers. Or something like that. I don't know if it made the final cut of 3 songs or three words.
Ethereal.
Yeah. So sick of that word. But like that was, and again, more of a production decision, but definitely also influenced by like the things that we listened to, like the more immersive music that we'd listen to.
Yeah, I'd say like a big influence on this album being a bit different is Nigel being on the drums, and he's just got so much energy and he hits so hard that the idea of not doing things that had energy and pace it felt like a big opportunity to do more of that. And honestly, I think even if Nigel weren't involved, that was more where the discussions we were having with Rocky were going, was, you know, distortions. And I think we've had this ongoing challenge with the dynamic nature of our music, that you'll be at a show and, you know, you'll really be able to hear Julie's vocal, and then you won't, because it just kind of, the dynamic nature of it kind of makes it a nightmare for a sound engineer. And we just wanted that to go away with this record. We just wanted for everything to be shouting all the time. So that's probably kind of crept into this album, is just you being more us. Like when we were doing vocal takes, it was like, cool, again, but maybe find another 50% and just kind of trying to push you to like scream harder. So yeah, it's, I think probably one of the major through lines is, whilst the people that have played the bass maybe and the drummers have moved around, and, you know, the guitar has always been the same, and Rocky and I have very similar thoughts on how to make that good. So there's a through line there, but I think the key thing that kind of sets us apart, and if you can hear a Hawk track, the thing that you'll know makes it Hawk, is Julie's vocal. Is just, I don't really know anyone that sounds like Julie, and, you know, that means that we can kind of make whatever we want, and it will still kind of sound a bit like us, because it's got the vocal on it. As long as I don't
leave the band, we will sound like us. No, but I think you're like, even when we do decide to do things that are a bit more straight to the point, your guitar always has a layer of, or I'm going to say like 8 layers of complexity that are somewhat signature to what we're doing.
This is our newest member of the band.
Oh.
This is Pete.
Hey, Pete.
Not saying much. And I think as well, I find it difficult to like pin my taste down. I have loads of different influences, especially when it comes to music and when it comes to singing. And I would say that vocal like eclecticness is probably influencing the layers as well, because I have a falsetto, and then I do like to just do some shouty talky bits, and then I like to belt as well. So in order for that not to just sound like we're going from 1 to 10 to 1 to 10, there's a lot of space in the middle to try and kind of make that all make sense and bring the listener with us instead of freaking them out.
And also, I mean, like, you know, just in general, when you're like listening to music, and as you're going to see like new acts and you hear like new albums and new releases, I mean, I think it's just like impossible for you not to kind of be influenced, like, for anyone. I think there's always just going to be like little ideas you're going to like here, there, and think, oh, that'd be cool to like incorporate and stuff. Obviously, I mean, like, you know, you were mentioning Nigel's now in the band. I mean, he was from Falcon, which I loved, and I remember seeing their last show at Whelan's, and I was like pretty much right in front of him, just like, yeah, he was like so on point, so like, you know, didn't miss a beat. And their music, again, like Bitch Falcon's music, could be very hectic, and it could be very pensive and very I don't know, like very slow and reflective. I was wondering, did their music have any influence over your choice to bring Nigel into the band, and how how did Nigel kind of get into the fold?
I think the first thing we said was, what is an acceptable amount of time to wait before we ask Nigel to join? No, but I have to also say on the record that we were very sad finding out that Bitch Falcon were calling it a day, because we work with Lizzie as well on our label. We were massive Bitch Falcon fans, so we tried to see the bright side in that, but maybe we can get Nigel to come aboard. And also it's been really exciting to see what Lizzie's gone on to do. That woman has, I don't know where she finds the hours in the day, but the amount of different sounds that she taps into, and also layers to her music via the visuals that she makes, it's been super interesting, and probably like an amazing upside to seeing that project get put aside, is to see what else they do.
So actually that's a good segue. So you guys are actually doing a launch in Workman Cellar on March 22nd for the record, and Sport Actus Dose, which is Lizzie's new band.
Yeah.
I just thought, I kind of mentioned that. I mean, like, what can kind of people expect if they pop along to that show?
Well, we saw their first show in Chennai.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. Like they I think, I don't know how long they'd been playing together, but they have some serious songs. I think that was the feedback on the night.
It's super exciting band.
Yeah, they're really good.
I think we were unfashionably early at Chennai because we were, I think maybe we got some food somewhere, I can't remember. So we saw the sound check. And obviously Chennai is a little bit rough and ready in terms of how that all works, and there's no real kind of privacy for anyone doing their thing. And I just heard Lizzie crack out a guitar riff, and I was like, fuck me, I really hope that's in a song. And then of course it was. And so it's kind of weird. Like, I often feel like, personally, my musical tastes, sorry, he's getting a bit mad because I'm starting to talk loud. I often feel like my musical tastes and things that I'm listening to are just, maybe it's through the day job, talking to people about music and being like, oh yeah, like that band, and they're like, who? And I've just met with that so many times that I think I've just lost the will to share things that I like with regular people. But with Lizzie, she'll often just like, a massive electronic influence for me would be Lorne. And when she was talking about Cool Girl, I was like, it really reminds me of Lorne. And she was like, yeah. And like, wow, I think you're the first person that I haven't had to introduce that project to. And likewise, when she was talking about Dose to me on a call recently, she mentioned Dive, who are coming to Dublin soon.
So good. Yeah.
And if you haven't listened to Dive, which is DIIV, they have an album called Deceiver, which just has all this kind of angst and My Bloody Valentine kind of bending guitars and stuff. And I think Lizzie's trying to do that with Dose, but with a bit more pop sensibility. Yeah. I think it's got the potential to be super exciting, and I just hope that, you know, they all see the same potential that I do with it. And I think Lizzie does, but keeping bands kind of excited is, as I think we all know, a bit of a challenge. So, but I think like they're right at the beginning at the moment. If you want to kind of come and see them play 5 or 6 really great songs and be like, wait, why don't I know this band? This is the time to kind of come and do that, because they're just lots of fun, and Lizzie's great live, whatever she's doing as well.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah,
that
was the cool thing about their final show too. It's just like how it was really interesting, because they had Usheen from Tumper on bass for that last show.
We were upstairs, so we probably saw you.
Oh yeah, but I thought it was cool how they were like really keeping the beat, and then just like Lizzie could just like go fucking wild, but still like, I don't know, like
that's the one where she kind of poured a beer on us.
Yes, so I remember that. But like how kind of like, I just love that dynamic. So I'm really looking forward to seeing those for the first time. But your new album, let's talk about that. It's called To Fall Asleep. It's I think like of your album so far, I think this is definitely is the most punkiest. What was interesting was actually you guys released an EP of 4 songs from it. What was it called? You Say You Won't, and 4 songs clocked in at 11 minutes. Like, that's punk. I like that kind of like that kind of.
We finally did it.
Some of that might be down to the fact that expiry is like 1 minute and 59.
Yeah,
so it brings the average down. But yeah.
But I like that kind of like punk attitude, just like, just say what you have to say, and just kind of like,
we've come along.
I'm not complaining that you're over long.
I would say working with other artists for me has made a big impact on that, in that I'm often like, right, that's 4.5 minutes at the moment. Can we get it down to 3:30? And if I'm going to be a dick to everybody else, then I kind of have to apply the same standard. But I would say you've probably been a big influence on that as well, in terms of it being more, you know.
Oh yeah. The faster the better.
Well, I think Expiry is a good example where you were like, I have a song idea that goes, and you just sang the chorus, and I was like, that's fucking great. How do we make a song? And so that just kind of came out of thin air, that one. But and it just didn't feel the need that we needed to wrap 3 minutes around it. It was just like, let's make that point a few times, and stick something next to it, and yeah.
The album does have like some floatier moments in it, and I think we obviously led with a lot of like tracks that we wanted people to resonate with quickly, and like we hadn't really explored that more kind of punky side to ourselves, so I think we were really excited to lead with those. But the record does have like, it definitely dips in and out of that shoegaze or just slightly more kind of layered indie rock. We've still got that through line, I think, with the theme of the album being like sleep or frustration at not sleeping, the things that keep you awake at night. We did want to make sure we were kind of capturing the joy of finding that piece of a good night's sleep, but it is mostly about the shit that keeps you awake at night.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So, you mentioned there the kind of like the floatier moments. I actually think it's quite a good companion piece to your first EP in a way. I think if people were fans of that, they might find elements in this record that kind of like resonates with them. I was wondering, like, yeah, when you kind of like, because you know your projects, like I said, kind of like fluctuate in sound, but I think like when you're making a new EP or a new album, is there consideration from the beginning for the overall connectivity for the aura of it, however you want to phrase it, or is it just when you make the record you kind of look back and it's just something that's you find was built along the way?
We've been talking about this recently, and I think we found that for different albums it's happened at different stages. Maybe at some point we from the outset said, like, as a band we want to stand for more of this and more of this, and maybe when we were becoming more politically vocal as a band as well, I would say that would have been like a conscious decision of like, let's make sure everything that we put out there this year is connected back to something that we believe in. And then I think if you head into our second album, that was a bit more of, we were writing songs and we suddenly noticed a pattern in terms of it being, I think the second record being more about like being personally at a crossroads and like, you know, getting to the point where you're realizing the consequences of your actions, getting older. And then this time around, it was again, actually it was almost more impulsive a decision than any one that we made before, where I had been having a few years of really struggling with sleep issues. And when we came to talking about the album again, it was just, why do we do something about sleep? It was kind of pulling out of I have all this stuff to say, and I didn't really realize where we could like put all of that energy and all that pent up like stuff that I want to say, until we just started talking about this album and how about this as a theme. And it ended up being something with lots of legs, because, you know, it's such a universal subject, needing somewhere to sleep, needing the ability to sleep, how we all experience sleep, whether it's good or bad, the privilege of having somewhere to lay your head. Like it became this kind of subject matter that kept on giving the more that we talked about it. And then as well, just the spookier elements that you can explore when you think of dreams and, I don't know, sleep paralysis or nightmares or, you know, hallucinations. So there was all these different avenues we could go down that really spoke to our more horror sensibilities, because Matt and I are both kind of into our horror, into our spooky shit. So this felt, I think, like a really solid idea for a theme for an album, something we really cared about. But then also when it came to us talking about the visuals, something that we could really jump in on. And, you know, being out of lockdown, being able to kind of create videos again and like work with directors again, I think that was another kind of layer on this theme of like, yeah, let's make this like your worst nightmare.
Yeah. What's interesting too, because I also struggle from kind of like sleep issues too, and one thing I noticed when I kind of like there kind of becomes a period of creativity. It's very strange, but like when you haven't slept in a while, I don't know, maybe it's just me, or I don't know if it's a universal experience, but I find like when you kind of haven't slept for a while, there does kind of become this like almost like LSD like kind of means of just like creativity, or kind of kaleidoscopic images, and it mentally, like, obviously I'm explaining it quite bad, but just like kind of images of ideas or concepts. I don't know if that's kind of like ever affected your work, Julie.
Well, I definitely become worse at everything the less I've slept. But you're proving my point that it is so interesting because everybody experiences it differently. What I will say is my brain gets really, really creative when I do manage to get to sleep. I'm a really lucid dreamer, and some nights it's not great because sometimes I'll wake up and it'll be as if I've been awake all night because I've been like climbing mountains and chasing bad guys all night. And I wake up and I'm like, how is it morning? But I think you also had something to say on it.
No, I was just going to say, like, I would identify with what you were saying there, where if I go back to my university days of just tracking things on a 4-track in my shitty little room, you can look at like what hour of the morning did I finish it in, and usually if it's like, 1 a.m. it's okay, if it's 2 a.m. it's all right, if it's 3 a.m. it's pretty good, if it's 5 a.m. it's a fucking masterpiece. And so like I would say that when you don't have a routine that's being forced upon you, that is probably more of a way that I would experience creativity, because you tend to just be like, right, okay, and then you just kind of go and do something that will occupy your mind and you'll enjoy. But I think when you have a day job to get up for, a big part of my creative process is like, how can I create a low pressure, enjoyable environment where I can be creative. And I think it's something that I've had to get really conscious about in terms of trying to control that more, because I can't, with the lack of time, it's really difficult to rely on inspiration. You kind of have to do the things you can to force things, to jar things loose. And that's definitely something that in the last 10 years or so, I think I've got quite good at. But I would say almost every artist I work with views art as like an enigma, like a thing that just kind of springs to life out of nowhere. Yep. And I suppose I'm just trying to ruin that for everyone and say, you know what, it's not. It's like there is even if it's subconscious thought, there's thought going into that. And the more you can put yourself in environments where you can repeat that process or embellish upon that process, the more interesting things are going to come out. And I'd say at uni, I was definitely that way of like, just need to wait for the idea to hit me. Whereas now it's like, if I pick up an instrument with a different tuning, it might spark that part. Or if I play a different instrument altogether, it might do this. If I go to the movies, have I ever said that? If I go to the cinema, like we'll go and watch something and then the soundtrack might trigger something. Yep. It's all sorts of things that can trigger a bit of a, like, I must do something now thing with me. But I think I have a massive amount of respect for the fact that just needs time. And so there'll often be days where Julie will be like, what are you doing today? And I'll be like, yeah, I need to do some music stuff, but I'm not sure it's going to happen today. And then at like 5 p.m, I'll be like, okay, let's give it a go. So it's not something you can completely control, but I'd say I've probably got better at that and try to encourage people to kind of, what is it about you that gets you in that LSD sort of hallucinogenic frame of mind? Not that I'm encouraging anything.
Yes. Yes, we definitely don't want to do that. Yeah, and I guess one final thing I'll say, like kind of going back to something you mentioned earlier, Julie, you were kind of mentioned that like when you first started kind of like songwriting, you could like sit on a song for months. I think I kind of like relate to that, where it's like, you kind of have a good idea, and I think the reason people kind of procrastinate, creative people kind of procrastinate, it's just me playing armchair psychologist, but I think a lot of the reason people kind of like sit on things for a while is because it's such a great idea that you're afraid of like fucking it up. Basically, you're like, oh, I have this kind of cool idea, but like when I have to actually put it into practice, it mightn't come to fruition. As someone who's now kind of created like so many EPs and albums and single releases and stuff. What do you kind of like? What would be your advice, if you have any, to people who might be kind of in a similar kind of like I don't know, purgatorial state of creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was left to my own devices, I would hyper focus and stay in that purgatory. I mean, probably a very productive in terms of I'd get right into the detail and into the weeds.
Yeah.
But I think if I didn't have other people I was working with and kind of was accountable to, I would probably still have that habit, and I still do. But because I'm in a collective, I'm in a duo, I have other artists as well as Matt that, you know, we're accountable to each other. I think it can help, and it did certainly help back in the open mic days, just to have a regular outlet, little deadlines popped into your week, into your month. Not to say like I need to have this finished by then, but I need to take this out of the context of like, you know, trying to perfect it, and, you know, get someone else's ears on it, get someone else's opinion on it. That was certainly how it felt, trying to like improve that momentum back in the day. But these days, the fact that we're actually very different in terms of how, like, I think you have very fully formed ideas and also have the kind of technical means to bring your ideas together more quickly than I do anyway. But then I'll have ideas, and because they're so fully formed in my brain, but I might not have the language to explain it. That for me would be like personally a reason where I might be like either worried it'll come out wrong, or worried it'll be changed, or worried that, I mean, everyone's always worried that someone might just say it's shit.
Yeah.
But the more I present something unfinished or imperfect, or even just a fragment of an idea to Matt, who I work with, something good always comes from that. So like, I think if you're ever finding yourself in a situation where you might be saying that you're just working on it being perfect, but what's actually happening is you're feeling like it's kind of stagnating because you're sitting on a project for a long time. I'd say the less precious you can get about sharing those ideas in unfinished forms, you know, in a safe space with someone you know you can trust and who has your best interests. That always works for me. I always have to remind myself that I should do that, but it's always a good thing. I think if you can get past this idea that, because the music, as soon as it's listened to by somebody else, it takes on a life of its own anyway. So it's always going to happen. So if I think if you find yourself bogged down by like focusing on waiting until the perfect time or in the perfect version of this song, then I would really encourage you to like look at your community or look at the people you work with and share and just like let go of your ego in order to try and let in a bit of collaboration. It's really difficult, and I'm still not very good at it.
That's perfect. I guess the final thing I'll just ask is, obviously you have the album comes out March 15th. I have it down here. Workman Cellar gig, 22nd of March. What else do you have planned for 2024 going forward?
We've written a new song. No, we're always like a year ahead in terms of where our brains are at versus what's happening right now. So we've obviously got the album coming out, and we've got some really interesting bits and pieces coming out around that. We've got a live session that we're going to share at some point. We've got our tour dates, and, you know, letting that release have some breathing room and actually enjoying the process, which is also something that I would advise people to, you know, not rush a release to the point where you're not able to have that breathing room to enjoy it. So I think learning from past very busy years, the focus for the first half of the year will be just enjoying having people hear it for the first time. Hopefully do a few shows, but we are already starting to mess around with some new ideas. We have one in the works. We don't have like album for a theme planned or anything that, but definitely a fun new song that typical us were like way more excited about than the other one. Tempted to put it on the set list in the Workman's, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think with
and other projects.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
So
Immediately, like Julie's working on a thing.
Nobody knows about this thing, but I'll tell you briefly about it. I've got a collaboration going with Stephen McHale, who was the guitarist in Bark. He's a really interesting guitar player who we would have toured with Bark a few times in the earlier days of Hawk. and he does things with chord progressions that I don't understand at all.
Nobody understands.
Nobody understands. But
That's the important thing.
The very satisfying thing is he'll send me these guitar parts and I'll send back a melody and he'll be like, that's not where my brain went at all. I don't understand what you've done, but I like it. So that's been a fun dynamic of like, because our brains are so different, seeing where this could go. And it's more of a pop, like kind of alternative pop, electronic and jazz influence, because Stephen is really influenced by like jazz chord progressions. So that's something that we've been working on behind the scenes that will see the light of day later this year, which will probably keep me busy. And Matt has released a new project called Birthday Problem just at the beginning of this year as well, which is scratching your electronica box finally.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that Rocky and I have started, which is just, we've been lucky enough to get probably 10 to 12 different people in a room and just kind of get different electronic kind of ambient weird ideas down, and that's, we're spending tonight, we bought a brand new green screen and we're gonna film. Rocky and I basically just don't want to be the face of the project, so we've created two puppets, and so we're going to film puppets against a green screen in space. So that's basically just going to be really stupid but fun for most of this year, and yeah, we've got a lot of stuff planned with that. And I probably shouldn't be mentioning that Maria's album is pretty much done now. Album 2 is ready to go for Maria Kelly, so that's going to need to come to life in a live environment. And so there's a lot to do, but I think probably only maybe 2 weeks ago was it that we were going into a rehearsal and we were like, should we try some new stuff? Yeah. And it's probably the longest we've had without having,
yeah,
I think there was probably a point where we were maybe thinking we were 3 and done, but I don't think we're thinking that anymore. No. With this, I think we're just going to maybe see what keeps happening with it, because I just don't think it's ever going to go away, that guitar itch. Yeah. To various things, you know. I
think that's the nice stage we've gotten to with the band as well. Like, we know why we're in it, we know what we love about it. I think have gotten to a point that we can see that it's allowed to change, and that's okay. And if it's something, you know, we have to enjoy it for it to be what we want to do. So if that means the sound evolves a bit, whatever that means, or if it means playing more or playing less, it's nice to have gotten to this point with a project where you really know why you're in it and you're doing it for the reasons that are, you know, for you. But I would definitely also say that if it ever looks like HAVVK aren't busy, that is absolutely not because of everything we've just said and all the other bits and pieces of kind of label and personal projects. We're never looking for more. Well, I'd say that we act as if we're up for taking on new projects all the time, but we're definitely not stuck for something to do ever.
But that's cool. Like, so, like HAVVK seems to be kind of like a fluid project, but one that like keeps you coming back for more. I was wondering, kind of like what is about HAVVK as like that's distinct from kind of your other projects, I guess.
For me, I kind of talk about it as a lifer, right? Like, you're in prison for life, and like I for me, HAVVK is my lifer. It's like I don't think I've learned everything, with a few exceptions, about myself and about what I like about music while being in this project. And I think like the last 10 years have been, when you said 10 years, I was like, it feels to me like 20. It feels to me like I've been in this project forever. And I just can't imagine what it would be like not being in it. And I think it would have to take a massive life-changing event to not want to do it. And the things that kind of, when we're sort of saying, are we 3 and done? It's like, if it's just not fun.
Yeah.
And there have definitely been times, for circumstances usually outside of our control, but some in our control, that it hasn't been super fun. And I think like since
And we're not the only band
yeah
as well.
yeah
Yeah.
All bands are not fun sometimes.
it can be difficult, but like I'd say since we've been in Ireland, it just has been fun. You know, it's just been fun, and like if it feels like that, like my 2024 motto was, if it's not fun, I'm not fucking doing it. And so that's kind of like I think an energy that we've all started to try and bring into the room, you know, is to just enjoy the time that we are spending together playing music and try and make it as good as we can. So for me, it's definitely just that thing of it's the most personal to me. It sounds most like something when I was like 18 I would have imagined making musically.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of how I would frame that answer as well, of like, it's the thing that sounds most like what I wished I would be doing when I was kind of a teenager, listening to listening to rock music, and especially I think that layer of like feeling slightly outside of that as a woman as well. It makes me really happy to kind of jump those 15 years ahead and be like, oh, there she is.
I think as well, if people didn't like it, then we probably stopped doing it. And
they didn't like it at all.
and don't get me wrong, like we know we're not sort of number one in the charts or whatever, but I think there's always just these little moments, like you say you won't, weirdly we just didn't push it as hard as we pushed everything beforehand, and it's done better than anything that we've kind of put out. It feels like people have just found that song, and it's little boosts like that when you're on a bunch of playlists, when you're track of the week on RTE, when you're invited up to the BBC and someone talks about your band, like they really like it, and you're like, wait, you like our band? It's just kind of things like that really make a big difference and kind of spark a bit more motivation as well. So yeah, I think, you know, if the album gets like 0 out of 10 in NME, maybe we'll think again about album 4.
You've done it now.
I've done it now. That's my kind of fishing to the critics. Difficult world being a critic at the moment as well. I think that's another subject, but I think if people continue to respond positively to something you're doing, it gives you, like, I think really if you boil it down, most of the reason I'm in music is because when I was like 5 or 6 years old playing the piano, people thought I was a superhero, and so it's just searching for that kind of gratification and that kind of that feeling again and again and again whenever you can get it. So when you get those responses, it really does make it easier for you to justify spending the time and energy on that sort of stuff as well.
Perfect. Thanks very much for your time, guys. I've really appreciated it. And is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up? Or
I think
come to our tour.
Pete's coming to add something. I don't know if he understands necessarily what's going on, but he's he says come to our tour.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks,
really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Take it easy.
Thank you for listening to that episode of Post-Burnout.com interviews. If you liked it, please subscribe and stick around because we have plenty more like this coming soon.